Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Janelle Brush. I'm with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, and I'm one of the leads for the Florida Shorebird and Seabird program. And today I have with me the program's data team. And the members of the data team have been working on developing abundance estimates for our state-listed and focal species of shorebirds and seabirds. Today, Cody Griffin is going to present to you our analysis strategy and the final results for our least tern and black skimmer abundance estimates. Right now, everybody, if you're a participant, you are muted. I recommend that if you are having technical difficulties, go ahead and type it into the chat. And following the presentation, we'll answer questions that are typed into the chat, as well as provide you additional resources for asking us questions following the webinar. So I will turn it over to Cody now. I hope everyone enjoys the presentation.
Thanks, Janelle. Hello, everyone. I am Cody Griffin, the quantitative analyst for the Florida Shorebird program. I know there are quite a few people on the line who are joining us today from outside Florida. So before we get into the seabird abundance analysis details, I will start this presentation with an overview of shorebird and seabird monitoring challenges and strategies in Florida. Florida has over 1,300 linear miles of ocean coastline, and this number jumps up to over 8,000 miles when you include tidal inlets. So Florida has a lot of potential habitat for shorebirds and seabirds. However, they share this extensive habitat with over 21 million residents and millions of visitors each year. This situation creates conditions where potential breeding habitats are limited and birds are dependent on conservation actions for survival. The scale of potential habitat, combined with the number of people on our beaches, creates unique monitoring and conservation challenges. With so many miles of coastline, the conservation and management of shorebirds and seabirds is beyond the scope of any one agency or organization. Fortunately, many dedicated people are working diligently to protect and monitor Florida shorebirds and seabirds. Collectively, this network of partners in the Florida Shorebird Alliance, or FSA. The FSA was formalized in 2009 and currently consists of 12 regional partnerships comprised of individuals and groups from the public, private sector, and a wide range of government agencies. Together, the FSA facilitates increased communication, improved coordination, and consistent monitoring and management at the statewide scale. About 265 FSA partners annually monitor routes covering nearly 900 miles of potential shorebird and seabird nesting habitats, in addition to over 300 rooftops. FSA partners follow a standardized monitoring protocol called the Breeding Bird Protocol for Florida shorebirds and seabirds. Monitoring is coordinated and standardized to ensure highly accurate research-grade data. Partners then enter data into the Florida Shorebird Database, or FSD. This picture is a great representation of the unique monitoring challenges we face in Florida and why we have to adjust typical monitoring strategies. For example, most nesting areas in Florida are within public view, and we actively educate the public about the negative consequences of disturbing the birds. So we guide FSA partners to collect information about nesting seabirds from distances that are outside of posted colonies. This is also one of many reasons why FSA partners do not use drones to monitor colonies. In addition, opportunistic predators like fish crows and laughing gulls will take advantage of disturbance events to prey upon chicks and eggs. To facilitate accurate data collection from outside nesting colonies, we created monitoring guidance documents for partners to reference and refine their data collection. Also, the Breeding Bird Protocol allows for flexibility in the type of counts recorded because the counts may depend on colony area, visibility, potential disturbance levels, and adverse weather conditions. Partners count nests, adults, and chicks at every seabird colony when nests and chicks are present.
Excuse me, Cody.
Yes?
I think you may need to share your presentation again.
Oh, did it go away?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened. My screen kind of flashed.
Maybe a network connectivity thing. There you go.
We back in?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, no problem. Where was I? Yeah, so partners counted nest adults and chicks at every seabird colony when nests and chicks were present. 73% of ground nesting seabird colonies are surveyed at least every 10 days by FSA partners. All the great shorebird and seabird monitoring efforts statewide by FSA partners adds up to over 14,000 records in the database annually. With such a wealth of monitoring data, it's essential to have a sophisticated tool to store it. The Florida Shorebird Database serves as a central repository for all of Florida's beach nesting bird data. It is made up of a front-end web application where partners can enter and explore their data and a back-end relational database where the data is stored. The FSD provides infrastructure that allows us to query the data for every analysis, and its online interface allows us to check every record for quality and accuracy. It also provides an easy-to-use tool for partners and managers to explore the entire dataset. Its two-pronged structure, the web application and relational database, are meticulously documented. Any changes undergo a thorough design and testing process, and we create internal archives on a weekly basis to guard against data loss. The analysis I'm presenting to you today is the first time that we solely relied on data in the FSD to produce statewide abundance estimates for nesting black skimmers and least terns. The abundance estimates are important because they serve as benchmarks that can be used to compare future population change. Managers, researchers, and other stakeholders use abundance estimates to evaluate large-scale population responses to locally implemented conservation management actions. Also, abundance estimates can be tracked over time to produce trends, which are used to gauge the effectiveness of those actions. The analysis I'm presenting today is for 2019, and the estimates we produced will serve as a baseline to compare future estimates. First, I will present the analysis we developed to estimate the abundance of ground nesting birds. Seabirds move across space and time throughout the nesting season. Our analysis accounted for this movement, and our estimates and associated confidence intervals reflect our uncertainty about how far and how often the birds moved. In 2018, we presented the analysis strategy in the statewide abundance estimate for rooftop nesting least terns. In this presentation, I'll describe the analysis details for the ground nesting seabirds using least terns as an example, but we applied the same methods to black skimmers. After I describe the analysis for ground nesting birds, I will present the statewide estimates for both species, including rooftop nesting birds. Finally, and most importantly, this process is easily repeatable and reliable. From pulling the source data to running the analysis, the entire process has been thoroughly reviewed and tested by the Shorebird Data Team. Before we dive too deep into the analysis details, I want to give some background about the data, share the rationale behind our analysis approach, and broadly describe how the analysis works. Next, we'll go through specific examples to see the inner workings of the analysis. I will present the 2019 ground and rooftop nesting least tern and black skimmer abundance estimates and show how we can get the overall statewide abundance by incorporating both. Finally, I will conclude with an explanation of the benefits of using an approach that considers how and when birds move. Our analysis produces an estimate of the number of ground nesting pairs in Florida and overcomes analytical challenges related to the facts that all seabirds do not nest at the same time. Some may move between colonies within a breeding season, and monitoring does not occur simultaneously across all breeding sites in the state. Seasonal immigration and immigration also needed to be considered when evaluating movement, so we only included data within the peak nesting time period, which is when the majority of pairs are on nests. This limits any potential counts of staging or migrating birds. For least terns, we use data from May 1st to June 20th. This graph shows the percentage of all ground nesting birds per week. These percentages show a majority of the birds were nesting, and is indicative of survey effort and statewide coverage. We are confident that peak nesting falls within this window because the majority of partners surveyed weekly. Thus, the highest count of nesting birds per colony is captured. For black skimmers, we use count data from May 20th to July 15th. Because most seabirds in Florida are not individually marked with bands, we developed an analysis to generate abundance estimates that reduce the risk of double counting pairs and reflects our uncertainty via confidence intervals regarding how far and how often birds really move. To reduce the risk of double counting and thereby overestimating the number of breeding pairs, we developed an analysis that accounts for the movement of birds among ground nesting colonies during the breeding season. We combined two strategies to account for bird movement across space and time and incorporate the variation in counts. We used a moving window to include temporal variation and colony buffers to include spatial variation. First, I'm going to describe how we use the moving windows. A moving window consists of the maximum count of breeding pairs in a colony for a specific number of days. The window shifts one day until the end of the breeding season and records the maximum count per colony per shift. Finally, we calculate the maximum count per colony for each window shift and sum those values to produce the abundance estimate. That's a lot to take in now, but we'll go through some examples later in the presentation. We define the window lengths to be 4 to 10 days based on available literature and about renesting information. Because there's very little information on black skimmer renesting and movement, we can only use the literature related to these terns. However, we applied the same logic to black skimmers. We accounted for bird movement across space and time using colony buffers. The spatial component was incorporated by applying a buffer to group colonies. We grouped adjacent colonies that were within 200 meters of each other. This step limited the potential movement between adjacent colonies, reducing the risk of double counting breeding pairs. Based on the literature and examples from Florida, we know that birds can move beyond 200 meters to nearby colonies and up to 40 kilometers apart throughout the nesting season. We applied these buffers to all colony footprints and created nearby colony groups where the colonies overlapped. We considered the group nearby colonies to represent areas we expect movement from renesting due to their proximity. In the next several slides, we'll look at examples to show the inner workings of the analysis process. First, I'll discuss how we mitigated the risk of overestimating birds moving between colonies. As we know, monitoring does not occur simultaneously across the state. So, if we considered each colony to be totally independent, we would risk double counting pairs that move to renest between different colonies. Birds can renest within 4 to 10 days after nest failure, and there is a risk of double counting if the nesting attempt occurs at a different colony. For example, if birds moved to renest, they were counted at the initial colony and then counted again at the new colony. The proximity of other suitable nesting habitat in the time between renesting presents a spatial and temporal challenge that this analysis was designed to address. Next, we will use a real-world example to see how breeding bird movement could lead to overestimating the number of pairs. This example is from ground nesting least tern colonies near Marco Island in 2018. We consider this as a hypothetical example of how birds could be moving because we don't know for sure. This scenario is likely an extreme example of movement because colonies were impacted by Tropical Storm Alberto. However, we still need to consider extreme cases when implementing this analysis because future events are inevitable. The individual colonies indicated by yellow dots and labels on the map. To visually represent movement between colonies, we can look at a ridge plot with ridge heights that represent the number of pairs counted during each visit. In this ridge plot, the letters on the y-axis correspond to the colony labels on the map. There are multiple movement scenarios that could occur during the nesting season. It's possible to see colonies changing in size, but it's impossible to confirm the origin and destination of individual birds moving among colonies. In this example, we can see that the number of pairs in some colonies grew as other colonies shrank. It's important to consider movement of birds among nearby colonies during the nesting season because this can have a major impact on the abundance results. Next, we can look at the data using a moving window during peak nesting season. The black rectangle represents a weekly window of data, and as the window moves one day through time, we can see the contribution of the number of pairs from each colony for each daily shift. Narrowing our focus to a single weekly snapshot decreases the likelihood that we are including birds that were counted among multiple nearby colonies. If we were to assume that all colonies in this example are independent, the total number of pairs would be 667, which is likely the sum of the max number of pairs from each colony. This is likely an overestimation. If we consider only the peak nesting season for these terns, May 1st through June 20th, we could sum the counts from colonies when the most number of colonies were active, and we would get 281 pairs. However, if we use a moving window approach, we are able to identify the week or 7-day window with the greatest number of pairs, 314. Now, we can consider another step in the analysis, grouping colonies. We have to ensure colony independence to prevent double counting pairs across multiple colonies. Colony independence applies that birds from one colony are not counted at a different colony within the specified time frame. If we assume all colonies are independent, then we will overestimate abundance as shown in the previous slide. In areas with a high density of nesting colonies, such as the Gulf Islands and the Panhandle, some are broken up into smaller tracts to make surveying more manageable. Likewise, they may be separated by a geographical feature, such as a road, inlet, or sand dunes. Birds can fly between these adjacent colonies, increasing the possibility of double counting. To limit double counting, we grouped colonies that were within 200 meters of each other. Finally, we dissolved the boundaries to produce the boundary of a larger grouped colony. Because some of the surveys from colonies within the larger group may have been conducted on the same day, we calculated the daily sum of the counts. This resulted in one count per day for the grouped adjacent colonies. After grouping adjacent colonies, the next step is to generate the larger buffers to group nearby colonies at different spatial scales. Not to be confused with grouping adjacent colonies, we refer to these buffers as the distance between nearby colonies. Grouping nearby colonies further reduces the likelihood of double counting. We assume each nearby colony group is independent, so birds do not move between groups, but they can move within them. If the grouping distances were too small, we could be overestimating pairs due to movement between groups. Conversely, if the grouping distance were too large, we could be underestimating pairs by overcounting for movement. The range of buffers we selected was designed to cover typical movement distances observed for the species. The goal is to derive an estimate over a range of nearby colony buffer distances using the moving window approach. In the next few slides, I'll explain in detail the moving window approach and use an example with 4 colonies from the buffer group A. Keep in mind, this process produces an estimate for each buffer distance and days in the moving window. Later, I'll explain how we incorporate all estimates to derive the statewide abundance. This figure represents an example of counts at 4 colonies, indicated by colonies IDs A1 through A4 along the y-axis. The shaded area represents a 4-day window. The maximum number of birds within the 4-day window is recorded for each colony, the green boxes in the window. Movement between colonies during the 4-day window is low, so we sum the maximum values. It results in 312 total pairs across all grouped colonies. Watch how this number changes as we shift one day. The window shifts one day, and the process is repeated. Notice that the count changed to 342 pairs. This is because the maximum number of birds for buffer ID A3 increased from 47 on day 4 to 77 on day 5. This process continues until the last survey. Here we have 335 pairs. Shifting one day, the count is 335 again. Another shift, and there are 310 pairs. Shift again, and there are 324 pairs. Finally, the last shift produces 288 pairs. Here are the counts recorded for each daily window shift. The maximum count of 342 pairs is the estimate for the 8-kilometer distance in 4 days in the moving window. We repeated this process using 4 to 10-day windows and nearby colony grouping distances of 1 to 40 kilometers between colonies. According to the literature, most least tern renesting attempts occurred within 35 kilometers of the original nesting colony. To be conservative, we chose to use the maximum distance of 40 kilometers between nearby colonies to capture this potential movement within the nesting season. The uncertainty of our abundance results is conditional on double counting birds that move between colonies. The likelihood of movement increases with time, as shown on the y-axis, and decreases as the distance between colonies increases, as shown on the x-axis. The results are one estimate per number of days in the moving window and the distance between nearby colonies. As we try to limit double counting, we need to recognize how the upper and the lower limits of the number of days and distance between colonies can affect the results. Now, we will look at the individual estimated counts for the 2019 least tern ground colony abundance and compare to the previous slide. The points you see in this figure represent the total number of pairs given each distance between colonies and the number of days in the moving window. With the previous figure in mind, the ideal estimate would fall somewhere between the over and underestimate extents. When we calculate the mean of all estimates, you can see the final estimate lies in the middle ground. Also, the 95% confidence intervals encompass the estimate uncertainty due to the uncertainty of movement. Here's a map of the imperiled beach nesting bird, or IBNIB regions, with a color gradient that represents the abundance of least terns in each region in 2019. Next to each region are estimates, with confidence intervals in parentheses. You may notice some regions, such as the Northwest, have wider confidence intervals. This is because there are more colonies within a distance close enough that the birds can move, thus capturing our uncertainty of double counting. In contrast, the Northeast has fewer colonies, which are further apart. Thus, the narrow confidence intervals represent a decrease in likelihood that birds were double counted. This does not include pairs on rooftops. Rooftop estimates will be included in the overall statewide estimate. When we sum the number of pairs across all regions, we obtain a statewide least tern ground nesting abundance of 3,215 pairs. Like least terns, this map shows the imperiled beach nesting bird region estimates and confidence intervals for black skimmers in 2019. Ground nesting black skimmers are found in the Northwest, Southwest, and Northeast regions, with majority in the Southwest, the darkest red. Again, this does not include pairs on rooftops. When we sum the number of pairs across all regions, we obtain a statewide black skimmer ground nesting abundance of 2,927 pairs. Now that we estimated the ground nesting abundance, we need to determine the number of rooftop nesting pairs so we can calculate the overall statewide number of pairs. We used data from the same peak nesting time period as the ground nesting analysis because it limited the risk of including the same birds in both analyses. We acknowledge that some birds may move between rooftop and ground colonies, but we assumed this movement would be minimal, particularly during peak nesting. We applied the detection factor developed in 2018 rooftop study to the 2019 rooftop counts to get the statewide rooftop nesting abundance of least terns, which is 3,991 pairs. We cannot use the same method we used for the least terns to estimate rooftop nesting black skimmer abundance because of the lack of correlation between the number of adults observed from the ground and number of nests on the rooftop. Therefore, our abundance estimate for rooftop nesting black skimmers was derived from the data recorded from elevated vantage points that allowed for the direct count of incubating adults. We applied our minimum count strategy during peak nesting season to calculate the maximum count per rooftop. The total number of rooftop nesting black skimmers was 79 pairs. Here are the results when we combine the rooftop estimates to the ground nesting abundance estimates for each species. We estimated an overall statewide abundance of 3,006 black skimmers and 7,206 least terns. You can see that the contribution of rooftop nesting birds are only 3% for black skimmers, but for least terns, rooftop nesting pairs make up 55% of the total statewide abundance estimate. In conclusion, we developed a process to estimate seabird abundance in Florida's ground nesting colonies that incorporates multiple spatial and temporal scales. The analysis generated 280 counts from combinations of 7 moving windows and 40 distances between colonies for each region that we used to determine the best number of nesting pairs. This analysis approach is both repeatable and reliable and builds upon and replaces the previous minimum counts of breeding birds. The Florida statewide breeding abundance estimates developed for black skimmers and least terns are the best number available and should be used until they are updated with new data. As the FSA partners continue to monitor seabirds, we can assess trends to help evaluate the effectiveness of our management and conservation actions. Because this approach is data-driven, the estimates and our confidence are contingent on the data for each year. Another benefit of this approach is that we can add the least term ground nesting estimate to the separate rooftop estimate to generate an overall statewide abundance. The next step in the process is to produce a peer-reviewed manuscript to document the process in detail to reference as we move forward to produce future estimates. We are also finalizing shorebird abundance estimates for American oystercatcher, Wilson's plover, and snowy plover. These estimates will be finalized by December, and we will schedule webinars to describe those analyses. I also want to remind everyone about the 2019 and 2020 annual reports that are available at the Florida Shorebird Alliance website. The reports summarize how FSA monitoring data is used to measure progress towards conservation goals, identify information gaps, and adaptively manage for the long-term recovery of shorebird and seabird populations. These reports are filled with useful information about shorebird and seabird conservation goals and strategies, monitoring effort, conservation and management effort and outcomes, minimum counts, seabird abundance estimates, rooftop nesting trends, hurricane impacts, filling data gaps, and species fact sheets. We would like to thank the network of 12 partnerships that make up the Florida Shorebird Alliance for providing top-notch data. Your contributions help guide conservation management actions and ultimately lead to the protection of Florida's beach nesting birds. If you would like additional information about the analysis, please email us at flshorebirddatabase@myfwc.com. If you would like to learn more about the Florida Shorebird Alliance, please email shorebird@myfwc.com. Thank you for joining the webinar today. I will hand it back over to Janelle.
Great, thank you, Cody. We will be answering questions that are typed into the chat, and we'll start with Marianne had one about the origin of the 200-meter buffer. I will hand that over to Ariam to answer. Ariam, if you would introduce yourself and then address that question, that would be great.
Thank you, Janelle. I'm Ariam Jimenez, one of the project managers for the project, the Seabird and Shorebird project here in Florida. And yeah, I would like to say that that's a good question, and that question was in our mind for quite a bit, and we decided to explore different distance intervals. So we went exploring different distances to group adjacent colonies, and we explored in a range from 0 to 500 meters at an interval of 50 meters. And we found that 200 meters was the distance where the counts show less variability. And also researching the literature, and we found that that measure or that distance is consistent with what other researchers have used for this species, meaning for these terms. So other or previous studies outside of Florida, they have used 250 meters, which is close to our distance for grouping adjacent
Right. Chris Farrell has a question. Arian, do you want to continue and answer how resilient is the methodology to missing data, sites that don't get sampled in some years?
So the methodology takes into account the data that is in the FSD. We rely on that data, and that's the main core for this analysis. Basically, we are treating least Tern and black skimmer population as a meta population, and we're considering what happened on the sites that are surveyed every year. Missing data might be occurring in every single year, but we are confident that the coverage from the FSA partners and the frequency on what the surveys are being conducted. What I'm trying to say is that we're not missing either. Most of the colonies that are active in Florida are being accounted for, and also the frequency of the counts allowed us to use that factor into the analysis as well. We feel that no huge colonies are being missed, and not a large number of colonies are being missed here. Might be some years with more issues, such as this year, for example, where many of the partners were not able to go to do some monitoring in the site, but even though we have sound data for this year. I don't know if that answered the question, and I don't know if any other team member wants to say something else about it.
I think we're good. I think, let's see here. Jeff has a question in the chat. In these estimates, roof and ground nesting birds are considered independent, no movement between the two. Can you talk about how comfortable you are with that assumption? How is roof-to-roof movement accounted for?
Yeah, I can take that one too. So yeah, that's one assumption that we did for the analysis. We're considering rooftops and ground nesting sites as independent. How comfortable we feel with that? Well, we feel as comfortable as we can, given we don't have solid or sound data showing movement between sites. We have asked different partners how they feel about that movement occurring in their areas. And the general consensus is that it might happen, that it won't be critical. I have to also, I need also to mention that previous estimates in Florida have considered rooftops and ground sites independent. So we are kind of following that assumption through until we have sound data showing that dispersal and interconnection between rooftops and ground nesting colonies. But until we can measure how much of that occur, we're not able to incorporate that into the analysis. So thus far, there are a lot of parts in the analysis where we choose to be conservative, and I think that somehow that is minimizing the negative effects that may have any kind of connection between these two habitats or nesting habitats.
All right. The next question is from Ezra. He wants to know, when reporting pairs of leased terns, is that data from number of nests divided by incubating adults times 2 or breeding adult counts? And this goes with our flexibility of our survey protocol and the type of data people are collecting. Ariam or Emma, one of you want to tackle that?
Yeah, sure. I can take this one. And Ariam, feel free to add on after I'm done. So Ezra, basically, when we talk about the protocol, we've got a bunch of different ways that partners can collect data. That includes presence, absence. That includes nest counts. chick counts and then adult counts. So what we did was figure out basically what the different combinations of count types are, and then which source would be the most relevant for that particular combination. For example, if we know that we have adults present at a site and then a count for the number of nests, then we use the number of nests. So we did that, and there were about, I think, over 60 combinations, and we ranked them, and so that all was incorporated into our count logic to derive the counts for each of these colonies.
All right. Marianne, knowing that collectively we are unaware of some of the number of least terns that are nesting at construction sites, phosphate mines, and undiscovered rooftop sites, should the total number of least terns be considered to be a minimum count, or do the confidence limits in some way account for these unknown sites? Aaron, you want to tackle that one?
Absolutely. Yeah, of course. They should be considered a minimum count, but please do not confound that with our minimum count pairs strategy, which is delineated in the 2019 report. But yeah, these numbers should be treated as an estimate, and because there might be sites that we're not accounting for, and also there might be other issues with imperfect detection. We should treat these abundance estimates as a minimum abundance.
All right, I'm actually going to go back up to Chris Farrell's earlier question and just add one more note to that. As far as tracking trends, the method is robust to missing sites because we could always rerun it across time using a subset of sites that we know in fact are sampling consistently across time. So moving forward, tracking trends, we'll be able to accommodate that piece in case sites are missing. We'll be able to track it using sites that are consistently monitored. Does anybody else have any questions for the team? Like Ezra's typing. Okay. Could you review Cody's slide with the statewide numbers? So that's the statewide ground nesting or our final results slide? I'm going to guess it's the final results. Cody, yeah. There we go. Let me know, Ezra, if I interpreted that wrong. This slide, is this right? Yeah, this is the good one to leave up because this is our final 2019 statewide abundance estimates for black skimmer and least terns. Do you want us to walk through any parts of this, Ezra? A few people are typing questions. I agree, Ezra. It's nice to see the estimates. Couple people typing questions. All right, Anna. Do the abundance estimates take into account nest success in terms of number of pairs with successful nests? So the abundance estimates are just the number of breeding pairs. Does not take into account nest success at all. It's just the number of breeding pairs. We're going to move into strategies for productivity, for example, in the next. That's the next step once we get the abundance estimates finalized for our focal species. CJ. What's the general thought about using drones to get a more accurate count? Yeah, in general, for partners, I'm guessing. Let me get over the roof, yeah. So this is a tricky question, and one we get asked, especially by partners outside of Florida. Let's see. Let me see. At a lot of, let's see, Rhea, do you want to jump in and talk about this one just in general? I was going to have Andrew jump in, but I don't think his microphone's working.
Yeah. In general, there's still a lot of guidance being developed for drone use in terms of reducing disturbance and impact to our nesting shorebirds and seabirds. And it's not to say that it isn't something that will be considered at a later time, but at this point in time, and Andrew, I don't know if your microphone, if you do have your microphone or not, I believe Andrew's on that team that's working on the language, and a lot of our folks, our counterparts with HSC and FWC, are working on that language. But in general, you know, our goal really is reducing disturbance. And when we go down that route of using drones, there's oftentimes a misguided, I guess, representation to the public that drone use is okay and that disturbance is acceptable. So that's something that we want to be very careful about when we're developing and that specific language associated with drone use. And so I'm sorry I don't have a very direct answer for that, but that's kind of where we are with guidance and direction for drone use at this time.
Yeah, and Andrew added a note in the chat. As FWC staff, we're not allowed to use drones at this time. The other thing, and Cody mentioned it briefly in his presentation, is at a lot of sites in Florida, even though drones may or may not cause disturbance, there's often a lot of opportunistic predators lingering around nesting colonies of least terns and black skimmers in particular, like laughing gulls and fish crows. And there's always that risk, even if disturbance is low, that they're already getting some predation pressure from those species, and that could be exasperated by the use of drones.
No, that's a good point. There's a lot of uncertainties. So what are the risks? Measurements of chicks versus nests, incubating adults, things like that. So again, just a lot of potentially unknown risks and uncertainties associated with assessing data derived by drones.
Let's see, Chris Farrell, can you explain more time how you arrived at the final estimate given the range of estimates produced for all the possible buffers? It's a really good question because we definitely produced a lot of options. I don't know, Ariam or Cody, if one of you would like to tackle that.
So I can take that one. Basically, the analysis, what it's doing is calculating the value for each distance size and for each count window. So we ended up with more than 200 and something possible estimates from each combination. I mean, because of each combination, and the final result is just the mean from that long vector of numbers. and we use the variation of that vector to construct our confidence intervals. Yeah, it's what God is showing on that slide. So every single point on that slide is a combination of distance and the number of days, and the count windows days, or our rolling window days. So, and then the estimate is the mean and the standard deviation of that. Or I mean, the mean and the variation of that set of numbers.
Christy, a follow-up question? Or are you good? Let's see if Chris has a follow-up, and then we'll go up to Anne's question. Doesn't look like he does. Well, seems like if better info showed reality is closer to one end of the buffer range, it may impact the estimate in a large way.
Yeah, I mean, as Cody mentioned during the presentation, our estimate, or our abundance estimate, is, I mean, the variation of our abundance estimate is mostly due or caused by the amount of days in the count window or the rolling window, and the distance, the grouping distance between nearby colonies. So if we decide that, for example, if we consider like a huge window, count window, which is 10 days, we will tend to overestimate our abundance estimate at smaller distances between nearby colonies or within nearby colonies. And it's the opposite for when we choose smaller count windows and large distances. We feel more comfortable. Actually, the abundance estimates will tend to go to that plateau part of the curve. And I think that is doing a better job, because we're not relying on points that might be an overestimation of our abundance estimates, mostly. I mean, we feel that there is a higher risk of biasing our abundance estimates if we consider that these colonies are independent. We know that these birds are moving. We know that they're using nearby colonies when they fail and renest. And that's why, assuming that every single colony that is entered into FSD will lead to bias, mostly to an overestimation if we consider them as independent. So, yeah.
All right. I am going to jump up to Anne's comment. She noticed that the largest roof nesting colony in Broward County this year was empty, but a few miles away, because as we all know, a lot of the beaches were vacant, there was a large successful beach colony. Do we think that many of the least terns from the Rooftop colony may have moved to the beach? So I'm assuming that the Rooftop colony wasn't active at all this year, and you have a new colony on the beach. And I think that Jeff might be able to speak to this about Pinellas County, but you know, it's definitely possible. There's been some literature about between nesting seasons, these terns will usually go back within 15 kilometers of where they nested before, and if the rooftop wasn't too far from the ground nesting site, they may have discovered that available habitat this year and used that. I think, and Jeff's typing, but I think that in Pinellas County they've seen, when they had a new island emerge, they had their rooftop numbers have declined, and they have a new colony that emerged recently that was on a habitat that wasn't there before, and I think there's some belief that some of those rooftop nesters have moved to the ground nesting colony. Yeah, so I think, Outback Key, Marianne, that's what I was talking about. So I don't think it's far-fetched to think that the rooftop colony may have discovered the beach and decided to nest there this year, but we won't know for sure without marked birds to be able to confirm that. But it's a good observation. I think one that some more than you probably observed this year. Let's see. Jeff, I think we're to Jeff's question. So the confidence interval is a measure of the variation of the spatio-temporal buffers. So the uncertainty in those buffers, not the uncertainty in the counts that were obtained. Ariam, you want to address that?
Yeah, that is correct. That is precisely correct. Our confidence intervals is a measure of our uncertainty of bird movement and the likelihood of double counting birds that move from one colony to another to the nest. These confidence intervals are not about the uncertainty in the counts, but the uncertainty caused by the movement between colonies, or the potential movement between colonies. That is correct.
Thanks, Ariam. And you see Jeff's comment. He also agreed with the roof to beach movement this year. All right. These are great questions. Does anybody else have any final questions before we wrap up? Yeah, thank you everybody for joining today, and I look forward to maybe seeing some of you on future webinars when we talk about our shorebird population estimates, abundance estimates. So no one from the data team has anything else to add. Hope everybody has a good day, and we'll talk to you guys next time around.